Hi, I'm Ramin, and this is probably the funniest thing I've ever said on Twitter, so you no need to follow me. It doesn't get any better than that. However, if you do want some occasional ops content, pictures of bicycles and motorcycles in the middle of repair, or blurry pictures from punk rock shows, I'm the account to follow. I'm an SRE at Twitter. I've been there for about 2 years, and I came in through an acquisition and work on the core infrastructure team. And I wrote this talk about how I learned to change my mind. And I want you to talk about both versions of that word. Changing my mind in the conclusion I've drawn, and also changing my mind on how I came to that conclusion in the first place. And this became important to me as I realized throughout my career that things I had learned early in my career were actually no longer as valid as they used to be. It started to bother me that even though I was gaining more experience, I was actually becoming less effective in certain areas over time. I started to really kind of think about why this was happening. And around this time as well, I was reading a very good book. People throw this book around all the time, and I highly recommend you read it if you haven't. Sorry, wrong slide. And the number of companies I worked at, this was pretty common too. People would say things like, we've always done it this way. They would cargo cult their configs. They would tune for workloads that they didn't have, but workloads that used to exist at different companies they had worked at. They really had taken knowledge out of one context and brought it to another without really thinking how it got there. And I started trying to figure out why this was happening, particularly to me and also the engineers I work with. And Sidney Dekker in this book, and again, I recommend you read it if you haven't, one thing he does talk about is the myth of the bad apple. He makes the point of people don't fly planes into mountains on purpose, and you need to look beyond the operator to figure out what went wrong. So in this case, I could say, okay, there are no good engineers, there are no bad engineers, they're just engineers, and why are we effective in certain areas and why are we not effective in others? The why question really bothered me. I mean, really, actually take a moment and think about it yourself. Why is your knowledge really good in some areas and maybe kind of static in others? So naturally, I figured philosophy was a good place to start. I really like this quote, the most useful piece of learning for the uses of life is to unlearn what is true. And I like that even ancient Greeks who lived in a much slower paced society than ours had this idea that what you know mattered, and even the fact that you might actually have to unlearn some things, like things that might have been true a couple generations ago were maybe no longer true now. And this is really important in our modern world where the future of a company is a lot of times riding on how efficient we can make their processes. And more efficient companies are more likely to survive. And actually, and after philosophy, the next place to go is, of course, Alice in Wonderland. However, in this case, we're actually going to raid biology a little bit. In biology, there's a concept called the Red Queen hypothesis. And what it states is an evolutionary hypothesis which proposes that an organism must constantly adapt, evolve, and proliferate not merely to gain reproductive advantage, but also to simply survive when pitted against ever-evolving opposing organisms in an ever-changing environment. And what this is talking about is the faster the rabbit runs, the faster the fox has to run to catch it. And if the fox starts running faster than the rabbit has to start running faster. And they use this to talk about diversity in populations and really how two predator and prey are like in opposed to each other and how they evolve in conjunction with each other. There's also an appendix at the end of this talk, and I'll post my slides. So it does have links to pretty much all these books and everything else. So let's talk about our ever-changing environment. And this list actually surprised me a lot. So when I started my career about 1996, that first column was sort of the state of the world. That 10 megaflops is actually a Pentium Pro, which I think actually came out the next year, and I lusted after. And that 354 gigaflops is an i7 Haswell, which is actually, I think, not even state-of-the-art this year. Also, 10 megabit was pretty common back then. Now I have mostly a network of 10 gig E, and people are talking about 100 gig E when it's not that People are throwing it around. Same thing with IOPS. I ordered a new Samsung SSD card this week, and it comes with 100,000 IOPS, which to me just seems ridiculous. So there's several orders of magnitudes in here, and this begins to kind of show us that like what we've learned earlier in our career is actually based on a lot of technology that has changed significantly since that time. And of course, now that we've mixed biology, a little philosophy, we end up with the human brain. And we are pattern-finding maniacs. We do it all the time. We do it unconsciously. We really just can't help ourselves. And actually, depending on which authors you read, some of them think that our ability to find and use patterns is actually the underpinning of human intelligence. So there's really no getting away from it. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how this pattern finding manifests in our thinking. And the big thing we do is we never start from scratch. When somebody comes to my desk and says, hey, that one API is throwing out 502s again, I don't actually do any science. I go, OK, I'll go restart it. I'm still waiting for that library fix. And I do it. Everything works. It's great. And I don't even look at the logs. I'm like, I just know what it is. I have this rule of thumb. That API, 502s, restart. And what I'm really doing there is using a heuristic. And I love heuristics. They're great. They're super fast. Look how fast I solved that 502 thing. I had to do no work. 502s, restart. And I can give that heuristic to anybody in this room. Hey, if you work for me and you get 502s on this API, restart. That goes in a runbook. You don't have to know anything about the service. You don't actually have to know what a 502 is. Like, heuristics are fantastic because they're so portable, they're so quick, and they require almost no information. And every other profession uses them, too. If you go into an emergency room, that doctor's not going to go look anything up in order to triage to get you to a state where somebody else can take over. Their job is to basically take you and make sure nothing else is going to happen until somebody else can start doing some research to see what the final problem may be. And this brings me to another book I really recommend. This one's only $11 on Amazon. You may not understand everything in it this early in your career, but me reading it late in my career really explained a lot of things in the middle of my career that I struggled with. I highly recommend reading it now, and you may have to like come back to it in years, and it'll still be useful. But one of the things Donella Mellows talks about is bounds of rationality, which is an amazing concept. It's very cool. And the idea is that your experience, the data you've gathered, the cognition, your ability to process, and the amount of time increases the area that you understand, and that's your bounds of rationality. And then over time, your bounds of rationality is going to increase, hopefully. And what I see is that it actually made it much easier for me in my career to be okay with my earlier work. My bounds of rationality was actually very small at that time. So now I'm reasonably okay with like, oh, okay, that was my first try. I didn't know anything about it. Now I'm smarter. I've had more time to process. I've thought about it a little bit more. And this is why postmortems are always done like a little bit after the incident. Like during the incident, you know very little. Your bounds of rationality is tiny. You're like, I'm looking for any signal. People are yelling at me. Stuff is coming in. I've got that sharp spike in my chest where I'm like, I don't know if I can solve this. The next Monday, bounds of rationality is huge. You've got other people. You've actually had time to look at all the graphs, not just the graph you thought was the problem. And yeah, in hindsight, most things are going to look obvious to you because of this concept. The other problem we have is we're not that logical. None of the stuff in this book actually is in the talk, but it was a fun little book about sort of all our misconceptions, biases, and things like our brain is sort of has problems processing. We're just not as logical as we think. But the human brain is oddly optimized. We're actually optimized to find a solution, not an optimal solution. And there's a fantastic psychological experiment around the Eistelung effect. It's really one of my favorite psychology talks, because everybody has favorite psychology studies, right? And what they do is they give you a couple of problems. They call it priming. So I'll give you 3 problems that are all solved with the same algorithm. And now I've kind of got you in a pattern. And then they'll give you a problem that you could use the original algorithm, but it's much, much slower. However, that problem can be solved with a much easier novel algorithm that you haven't been exposed to before. 70% of the people will choose the one they've already tried. And if they bump up the stress level by testing or by timing you or saying, oh, we'll give you money to the first finisher, that goes up to 98%. And actually, this sort of mechanical thinking, the effect goes up as you get older. Actually, oddly, it's curvilinear, where like 13 to 14-year-olds are actually exhibit it much more than like a 21-year-old. And then it starts going up again as you get older. So particularly for me in my 40s, it's something I have to watch out for. So we've kind of talked a little bit about all this area, the Red Queen hypothesis, bounds of rationality, heuristics, kind of time to start tying it together. And basically why I was becoming less effective in my career was I had built heuristics on old data and less experience, and I'd never actually thought about updating them. I always assumed they'd be there when I needed them. They'd always be equally valid throughout my career. And in some cases, I found out that some of my heuristics were actually superstitions. Don't run that. Don't touch that box. So nobody understands radius. Like these are things that got said in various companies. It's always the network. We probably have many of these at your company that nobody's actually taken time to sit down and figure out, like, hey, was this ever true? Not alone is it even true now. So if only there was a field that was concerned with how we think and changing how we think, and maybe had a couple decades of experience working with people and helping them change their mind. Cognitive behavior therapy is the one I'm looking for. And the fun thing about this is going back to that isolung effect, what they realized was if they told people at the beginning of like the new question, don't be blind, it dropped the number of people that relied on the old algorithm by 50%. And that's all they had to say was, don't be blind, which I find really amazing. It's just so simple, and it doesn't clue them to anything. It just tells them to be aware of the person they are. We're going to stick strictly with the cognitive and kind of cut out the behavior. CBT is a huge field. I'm not even going to attempt to do it justice. In a lot of ways, it's like Agile. Everybody has their own particular kind of take on it. So we're just going to kind of cut to the main. So one of the things you can do with CBT is you can really sort of emulate the therapy session. Find somebody you work with, coworker, different company, and they can help you think. They can ask the questions you didn't think to ask. They can actually, like, should I have got this right? Am I taking too much responsibility? Was this the right decision? And they can actually help you think through some of this stuff. Whereas on your own, it's more of a problem. Also, the very fact of speaking the words or writing things out changes the way. In your head, it's very easy to be stuck on how things work. Once those words come out, you're like, oh. I mean, everybody's done a little bit of rubber ducking troubleshooting where you explain your problem to either an inanimate object or to some coworker, and all of a sudden, you're halfway through explaining it, and it all makes sense. It's really the same concept. Another thing we can steal from CBT is something called reprocessing. It's a technique where we take our past experiences and re-examine them with our new skills and understanding. One of the things I like to do is try and emulate the first company I worked for on my laptop, which is actually getting easier and easier. Another one I like is the first startup I really architected completely. I try and think, how would I do that now with 10 years of change in the industry? So we're going to do a little bit of a contrived example about reprocessing. But generally, the idea behind reprocessing is we've assigned results without really understanding like how our actions influence the results. The example I like is you go into your therapist and you say, hey, I've got a lot of issues to deal with. I caused my parents' divorce. And they'll say, okay, sit down. Like, why don't we talk a little bit about it? And then the story starts to come out. And they're like, okay, well, how old were you when your parents got divorced? You're like, I was 7. And if they're good, their face doesn't change. And then they ask you to explain the story, and you're like, I was at the supermarket, I left a toy behind, one of the parents had to go back and get it, that started a fight. That's why they got divorced, that particular fight. And then your therapist would draw you out a little bit more of, oh, well, did you move that year? Oh, yeah, we moved cross country. Did somebody lose a job? Oh, yeah, well, that's why we moved. And oh, what about your grandparents? Oh, yeah, well, there was the funeral next week. And all of a sudden it comes out that there were all these other stress factors. And while you may have caused the fight, you probably didn't cause the divorce because of all these other things. Your actual effect on things were very small, but because you made this decision with your limited bounds of rationality at the time, you thought you were more responsible than you were. So a really good postmortem is like a therapy session. You don't want to be taking too much responsibility. You want to actually understand where the root causes were. It's very easy to come in and say, we did a release, I hit the wrong button. And take all the blame yourself, where in the postmortem you're like, well, why was the wrong button on the page? Why is the wrong button even an option? Like, we can investigate all these things. Like, how would anybody have even known which was the right button? And we can start building new heuristics around better information. And these heuristics, we should keep an eye on them. There's a list of cognitive biases in the appendix as well. But the three I think that are most appropriate to us is overgeneralization, which is not nuanced enough. Releases are bad, databases are bad, or things that cover way too much space. One of the examples I have from work was we did a large release with a database change, and we decided, okay, releases with database changes are dangerous. After we unpacked it a little bit over days when all the information came in, we decided releases on very busy tables with rows more than 10 million that need to be altered are slightly dangerous. And that's a much more nuanced sort of heuristic that we can use. Same with filtering, where we accentuate the negative. If you see yourself doing if most of your heuristics are don't do that, you probably want to fix that. A little bit of yes and no, do that in these situations, don't do that. Try and keep it pretty even so you're not just don't. And that's pretty much it. I thought I'd end with the Kafka's Metamorphosis cover, which you might recognize. And then I do have all the appendixes at the end as well. So were there any questions? Or? I have not. Actually, I did read some of the stuff he was referencing on his blog before he finished his master's, and that actually what started me on heuristics. Yeah, I did definitely steal a lot from him. Oh, had I read John Allspaugh's master's thesis? Heuristics and stress under pressure. Is there anyone else? Cool. Thank you very much.